Good morning all. My name is H.E Mckenzie. I'm the Principal of Trade Investment Advisory and I've also been a long-standing member of the Council of the French-Australian Chamber of Commerce in Victoria. I would like to start this morning by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet, scattered all around Australia and equally in France, where of course there would be Indigenous elders, but nevertheless. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be gathering with us today. I would like also to introduce my colleague, Jason Collins, who'll be assisting with this interview. Jason.
Well, good morning, everyone. Warm greetings from me, Jason Collins. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the European Australian Business Council. And for us, the relationship with France, of course, but also the French-Australian Chamber of Commerce, an essential partnership for us, and delighted to be joining for this interview this morning. And it is, of course, my great honour to introduce our new ambassador to France, freshly minted in the role for a mere number of days, Her Excellency Gillian Bird. Welcome. Lovely to have you with us.
Thanks, Zoe. Thank you, Jason. It's terrific to be with you. This is, I think, probably my first role in the job. So it's great to be doing this.
Well, I hope you're settling in well. I know there's probably not much to do in France at the moment, but nevertheless, you have been a long-standing inhabitant of Canberra. So maybe it's a bit like those early days. I think Gillian and I were actually neighbours for a while across the road from each other in Howard Street, I think. And so there wasn't much to do in those good old days, was there, Gillian?
There's lots of work, so lots to be done on the French-Australia relationship.
So on to the work. At a bilateral level, things have never been as good between France and Australia as they are now, as was particularly visible when Emmanuel Macron visited Australia in May 2018. How do you see us continuing this extraordinary momentum and excitement in our current relationship?
Thanks, Zoe. Yeah, you're right to mention President Macron's visit. It really was important in so many ways, particularly coming so early in his mandate. It really cemented and underlined the strong relations between our two countries. It's pretty extraordinary. It was the first ever bilateral visit by a French president. So we were delighted that he came. I'm sure it won't be the last visit of a French president, but it was terrific to have him come. It was also memorable. It was where he gave his landmark speech at Garden Island, which really set out his vision for the Indo-Pacific and France's role and what Australia and France can do together. Since that visit, we have been going from strength to strength. I think the relationship has probably never been stronger. We have very aligned interests and values. We have shared interests, obviously, in supporting peace, stability, and an open, transparent, rules-based international system. And so our interests and values are very aligned. Bilaterally, it would be remiss not to mention the very important future submarine contract. That's obviously critically important to our bilateral relationship. And we're also working on a lot of projects across the board under the umbrella known as the Australia-France Initiative, Affinity, which helps pull together what we are doing. At the EU level, we're also very actively engaged, of course, on the FTA negotiations, and multilaterally, we're doing a lot of work together on the rules-based order. I do think it's worth, you talked at the beginning about COVID. I think in a post-COVID world, business networks such as the French-Australian Chamber of Commerce, and of course EABC and ABIE here in France, will play a critical role in reinforcing relationships between our countries and supporting a sustainable economic recovery going forward.
So in relation to the submarine contract, which you did mention, that has brought about fantastic collaboration across myriad domains, not just defence and security, but equally advanced manufacturing, cyber security, innovation and skills. How do you feel, what is left for us to do in terms of aligning our business sectors? What should be the next frontier?
Yes, so beyond the submarine project, or submarines to start with in the first sector?
Well, submarines to start with, but then what else? In those particular ones I've seen, innovation skills, particularly cyber security. It's fantastic to have new entrants to the cyber market from France as well. Where do you see that growth, that collaboration, that hand in glove collaboration progressing? through the submarine project and beyond.
Yeah, let me start with the submarine project because it is good, and as you said, it goes beyond delivering a very important defence platform. There's a lot of aspects to it that I think we can have stronger engagement, and it's a platform to build on. Some of the participants to your conference might already be suppliers to Naval Group. They might already be part of the value chain for submarines, but they might also be wondering how to participate in the future submarine program. So it might be worth mentioning here that for some years now, working often with Naval Group, we've been encouraging French companies supplying Naval Group to consider setting up in Australia in order to become eligible to bid on the work packages that Naval Group Australia is beginning to issue and will continue to issue for the 50+ years of the program's life. So that's one aspect of it. And the commercial opportunities in Australia are beginning to flow. A good example of this is a series of work packages issued by Naval Group Australia on the 19th of October for a total amount of Australian dollars 900 million. And companies with a legal presence in Australia can respond to those tenders and potentially be selected as a supplier. So anyone wanting to find more information on these opportunities can do so via Naval Group Australia's website or the Australia Industry Capability Network. And of course, Austrade is ready and available to provide any more support on the submarine project. I think on the submarine, but happy to go beyond that into some of the other areas you touched if you would like.
Yeah, so beyond those ones into more niche domains, are there others that you see are sort of showing green shoots and looking quite exciting in terms of collaboration between France and Australia?
And I think there are. So let me mention a couple of them, I'll try not to cover too many, but let me try and hit the high points. So I do think key emerging sectors in the coming years will include hydrogen and critical minerals. Both of our countries have ambitious strategies to develop those sectors. So France has a €100 billion recovery plan and a €7 billion hydrogen strategy. And of course, in Australia, we've got our technology investment roadmap, a critical minerals strategy, and a national hydrogen strategy. Australia's hydrogen strategy seeks to create hydrogen hubs to cluster large-scale demand, making Australia a global supplier of hydrogen in the long term. And interestingly, French companies are already at the forefront of the drive to create a hydrogen industry in Australia, with ARENA-funded feasibility studies for green hydrogen production in Queensland and West Australia. And another example I should give of Australia-France collaboration is the new international research network between CNRS and the University of New South Wales on conversion and energy storage. So I do think that whole area of hydrogen, critical minerals is important. On critical minerals, as you would well know, Australia aims to position itself as a world leader in exploration, extraction, production, and processing of critical minerals. And it's a natural next step to add value and complement our resource abundance and mining expertise. So I think there's big scope there. Moving on, but also in the energy sector, renewable energy is obviously a critical one for Australia and France going forward, with high levels of growth expected in renewable capacity and generation. Obviously, energy storage is key to enabling electricity networks to provide reliable power, and the low emission technology statement sets out the objective of enabling reliable wind and solar at prices around the average wholesale electricity price of today. So I do think there's a lot of work happening here already, and French companies such as Neoen Energy, Total Eren, and Bouygues are already contributing in this area, and particularly on this whole issue of large-scale energy storage technology. So I think that's another one. The circular economy is another area of growth. France's Suez and Veolia are also already well known in Australia in that area, but there is scope for further efforts, I think, in that one as well. Let me just mention a couple of more. Plastics, energy, waste, and e-waste, similarly related areas of activity. And I shouldn't finish without mentioning infrastructure. We touched on that already, and of course, it's a big part of what's already happening for a long time. but it continues to provide an area for really driving forward French-Australian cooperation. And I think critical transport infrastructure projects in pretty much every state and territory provide a lot of opportunity, underpinned by federal government's infrastructure record, 110 billion infrastructure program in that area. And let me finish with Fintech, because I do think that's another area which came up quite a bit in my consultations in Australia as an area where I think Australia and France can work well together, with Australia really positioning itself as a regional fintech hub for French firms. Despite the current global crisis, I think the fintech sector in Australia is showing real resilience, driving change in consumer digital adoption and significant increase, obviously, in consumer digital payments and transactions. So that's another area, I think. So it's quite a few, but I do think it just shows the breadth of areas that we can continue to work in.
And it's true, as a Victorian, when I'm allowed out of my house and I do get to walk around Melbourne, you see French brands, French contribution to both infrastructure and transport absolutely everywhere. And that certainly wasn't the case 10 years ago, but those recognised names, particularly the patron members of FATCHI, you see them everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Indeed. So moving from business more to the personal side of things, there's a great deal of affection and affinity between Australians and the French. I remember when the terrorist attacks occurred in Paris in late 2015, there was an explosion of empathy and identification with the people of France. You know, we lit up our great monuments in the three colours of the French flag. But we tend to still have a somewhat superficial appreciation of each other. It's always the grand monuments of Paris and the beaches and the kangaroos and the animals of Australia. How do you think we move on from that sort of understanding, and how do you encapsulate the popular understanding between France and Australia of each other at this juncture?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, because we don't want to jettison those warm and positive impressions we have of one another, and they're really important. Sometimes they're seen as a bit stereotyped, but there is substance to them as well. And I think it's marvellous that Australian and French people do have such a positive opinion of each other. So as I said, we don't want to do away with those more traditional images, but we do want to build on them. And I have been struck, one little figure that I was given, which underlines, I suppose, the links at that personal level, is that apparently Australia has been the most popular destination amongst French people for working holiday visas since that began. So we've had over 250,000 young French come through Australia. So just a sign that, you know, maybe some of those traditional images, they prompt people to come and visit, and then you get to see the country and you see all that it's got to offer. We were very heartened by the wonderful support that France showed us and the French people during the bushfire crisis. That was also another remarkable sign of that kind of outpouring of affection and support. France is still a tremendously important tourist destination for Australians, obviously not at the moment, so it's a little bit quieter on that front. But it really is interesting that in 2019, so if you look at before COVID and everything happened, we had nearly 1 million Australians visiting France. So yeah, we're getting that the people flow, which I think is very important. I think to help build on how can we get a contemporary image of Australia out there, I do think the visits, once we can get back to that helps. I think the sort of thing you're doing now, because I think the business side of it is maybe not as well known as it should be. So there's work we can do, and conferences like this do really highlight that incredibly important economic and commercial relationship. Strategically, we're doing a lot more together, and I think things like President Macron's speech at Garden Island kind of highlight that broader dimension of what we're working on together. I should mention we're doing something next year, COVID circumstances permitting, which is a big promotion of Australia in France. It's called Australia Now. Timing might not be ideal, but we're looking at doing it, probably we pushed it back a bit, June to October next year. So it's a big promotion, and it's going to be an opportunity for us to showcase our partnerships and exchanges across all sectors. So there's a cultural dimension, which is very important, but we're going to cover business, science and research, as well as art, dance, cinema, tourism, indigenous culture, sport, innovation. We're going to try and make it as broad as possible, and that will help counteract some of the cliches, or move beyond the cliches, build on them to really show modern contemporary Australia. So I'm really quite excited about that promotion, and we're going to use innovative ways of, if we've still got some issues around people moving or other things, we're finding innovative ways of getting the message out there. So watch out for that, Australia Now.
We will. Jason.
Fantastic. Thanks, Zoe, and thanks, Ambassador. And once again, congratulations. And thanks so much, too, for your real enthusiasm and interest in embracing the business agenda as one of the key facets of the mission that you now have, leading Australia's presence in France. And we're looking very much forward to all the collaboration that we've already been talking about. I'd like to turn to France's role as a leader, both within Europe, but also globally. You know, of course, France is one of the most important economies in the world. It has enormous both hard as well as a soft power. It's a foundational leader of the European Union. And so there's some great opportunities, as Zoe's mentioned before, not only what we can do bilaterally, but what we can do together in a much broader sense. And so if I could ask a few questions along those lines, and starting off perhaps at the strategic level, and that is, as a Pacific country, as France is in our region, but also with extensive commercial and political interests right across the region, how do you see that France is looking to Australia to be a stronger partner within this region? But also too, for Australia, there was a perception, as you know well, I'm not sure it was entirely true, that Australia's conduit to Europe was through the UK. I mean, part of that might have been true, but certainly that's been complicated by Brexit. But it's probably a matter that we perhaps didn't ask France as much as we might have about how we could work together in terms of what Australia's ambitions would be in terms of closer engagement at that European level. So just interested in your initial thoughts on those.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jason. It's a good question. And we touched on it a little bit, but yeah, it is interesting that as the bilateral relationships grown and diversified, we've really increased our cooperation regionally. And when I say regionally, I mean in both regions. So in the EU, and in our region, in the Indo-Pacific, and it's both countries who have been working on that together. And you're right, France wasn't always the natural partner. We weren't always the natural partner for France, but that has changed. It is changing, and I think it will continue to grow. So that's quite exciting. It's an exciting time for me to be here. France has made very clear the role it wants to play in the Indo-Pacific. We welcome that. We want to work with them on that Indo-Pacific role. They are, of course, Pacific presence as well. And we want to work with France in the EU context. France is an incredibly important member of the EU. We obviously work very closely with Brussels, but EU member states are very important. So France, so it's really that two-way dimension, which I think has grown enormously important. So in the EU context, obviously the FTA, I should keep mentioning that because it's really important. We want to conclude a good, strong FTA with the EU, and France is obviously a vital partner in helping us conclude an ambitious and comprehensive FTA, which will then give another lift, obviously, to the commercial relationships as well. But within the EU context, it's not just the FTA, it's obviously also strengthening cooperation and dialogue across a much broader range of areas, including multilaterally. And France has been a leader in the push on effective multilateralism. We're working with France on that and other countries in the EU. In the Indo-Pacific, we're strong and natural partners with France, and it's, as I said, it's been a delight to see the greater French engagement encapsulated really in that garden island speech. And we've already, off the back of that, we've had a number of initiatives. We've held an inaugural Pacific policy dialogue in June this year with France, and that's an obvious natural area to work. And we've agreed to explore possibilities, and this comes back, Zoe, to your infrastructure point. We've even agreed to explore possibilities to reinforce cooperation on infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific region. So there's work underway there. We obviously worked well with France in the Pacific in a number of areas, bilaterally and regionally. That's another one where we can continue to strengthen. And there was an initiative launched, I should mention, which is led by France but co-sponsored by Australia in 2018, the QI initiative, which is all about, and it's very important, obviously, strengthening resilience to climate change through biodiversity conservation for Pacific. So there's a range of areas in Pacific. I would like to highlight here something that's very important and relatively new. It's the Australia-India-France Trilateral dialogue, which is now underway, and had a good discussion in September about challenges in the region, particularly the COVID challenges. So that's another mechanism where we're working closely with France. Good military cooperation, worth mentioning some of the military engagement we've had, which is increasing in the region. So I do think, in answer to your question, we're stepping up what we're doing together in the Indo-Pacific, and we're working closely in an EU context. So it's obviously Brussels, but also with France on what we can do together. So I think, yeah, it's an area, a lot of potential. So I think I'll be very busy in the coming period, which is good.
Absolutely. And you referred to the free trade agreement, and of course this is a critical part of the bilateral but also the regional ambition. It's a vast economic relationship, as we know, not only in France and Germany and many other countries, but also right across the continent. And we've seen at a bilateral level a real intensification and growth, quite a staggering rate of growth in terms of the investment and trade flows between Australia and France. And we really see this free trade agreement as an opportunity to create a modern framework around the economic relationship. Of course, trade agreements are always difficult. They're technically exceptionally complex, but also they have a lot of sensitivities attached to them. There's traditional areas such as market access. There's sort of the domains where new free trade agreements or new evolutions of free trade agreements are going to around digital economy and services and regulations and so on. And then, of course, there's the overall just Europe and Australian companies getting to know each other's markets better and really understanding where those opportunities are. I wanted to ask how you see what are some of the key priorities in terms of supporting that advocacy effort within France. There's a lot that's in the FTA, but of course there's a lot that's not in the FTA, and there's some fantastic opportunities in terms of what could flow from that.
Yeah, no, it's a big priority, obviously. And the FTA negotiations, I mean, they're well advanced. I mean, despite all of the difficulties with COVID, and I must say, I pay tribute to the negotiating teams. It's not easy doing these virtually, but they are well advanced, and we remain committed to securing an agreement as soon as possible. And in fact, the next round of negotiations will be pretty soon. It's actually 30 November to 11 December. We've now got to the stage of the process where all the initial market access offers have been exchanged, and negotiations are continuing, including on goods, services, and investment and government procurement. So it's at a good stage, but we're not quite there yet. So this final period is going to be really important, because I think it's, particularly coming out of COVID, nothing more important than making sure we can really push forward on the economic and commercial front. So to get an overall package that's balanced and mutually beneficial, that's got new market openings for Australia for goods and services, that promotes better conditions for two-way investment, which is obviously a core feature of the relationship, is really, really important. So that's the objective. Obviously, the goods is still an important part of it. We are, you know, the core feature of FTAs is obviously eliminating and reducing tariffs, creating new openings for export sales. But services is really important too. And I think that's, you know, it's two modern service-oriented economies. This FTA is a really important opportunity to get an ambitious outcome that can really maximize that growth in services trade, which is already a third of our two-way relationship with the EU services trade. So it's already a big part, but I think there's more that we can do there. So yeah, to take your point, it goes beyond. We've got obviously the important aspects of goods, but services, investment, equally important, and we think this will help really drive relations forward. So I wish our negotiators every success. As I said, it's not easy doing it virtually, but I have great faith in the teams to get us there. And then once it's in place, really working with all of you, it will be a real platform to move things to the next level here in France. So that's what we're looking forward to.
Fantastic. Look, absolutely, the negotiating teams have been doing an extraordinary work. I think managing I think the last round of negotiations involved over 70 different separate video conferences to examine different aspects of the negotiating, or the different elements of the negotiation. So we're looking forward, and I think they're doing a fantastic job to the next round that's coming up very soon. Just perhaps if I could ask if you have any ideas on what business sectors and business stakeholders could be doing more to both support the work of the FTA negotiations, but I guess in a broader sense, the sort of work of the embassy in France. I think we've seen through the Australian government's priority on economic diplomacy and working more closely with industry sectors, organisations such as the French-Australia Chamber and EABC and others. There's a lot of work that we can really do effectively together, a lot of information sharing as well. So through the FTA process, we know that the DFAT team are very keen to really understand, and would certainly encourage people on this call that if you haven't already, to let us know what are the sorts of issues, the problems that you're experiencing, the blockages, the roadblocks, etc., to those business flows, because precisely these agreements, they may not be able to solve every problem, but certainly understanding better where the issues lie is one of the processes. So I think the work of this conference, also closer relationships between ABI and MEDEF and other institutional players in France, is all part of that collective effort. But do you have any other thoughts or observations on that agenda?
Yeah, look, really just to echo everything you just said. I mean, obviously business engagement is absolutely critical. You know, final deal has to be one which supports the interests of business, but it's equally important for business to be vocal in support of the FTA. We need to hear both Australian and European companies vocal in supporting an ambitious, comprehensive FTA. So we need your engagement. I do know that DFAT holds a stakeholder briefing for Australian businesses after each round of negotiations. So if anyone is interested, hasn't been involved, do contact DFAT. Those consultations are absolutely critical. And obviously here at the Embassy in Paris, always happy to hear from business. But can I just echo everything you said about the importance of business leaning in, engaging, speaking up, supporting this process? Thank you.
The returning a bit to that theme of our work together in bigger fora, of course the WTO is going through a critically important period at the moment. Australia and Europe have been working very closely on the WTO reform agenda. There's a new Director General in process at the moment. Of course, Paris is home to the OECD, and go Matthias, I must have a plug there. There's so much that Australia and France and Australia and Europe more broadly can be working on to very positively try to work through some of these most difficult challenges we're having in terms of the future of trade, the future of or addressing issues such as cybersecurity, digital economy, and others. Just some thoughts you might have in terms of, well, I'm sure you would see this as one of the important elements of our work between Australia and France. But any other thoughts on how that we can best prosecute that?
Yeah, no, thanks. Good point. And as you said, we really are stepping up our work now with France. I mean, it's challenging geostrategic circumstances, but we both have very shared common interests in effective, functioning, rules-based multilateral orders. So we're working in WTO at the moment. We're working across the UN more broadly. Obviously, WHO, we're very, very keen to take forward effective measures there as well. So I do think this is a unique juncture where France and Australia can really step up together. We're already doing it, but it's at the moment is ripe, particularly to work together on those international challenges. We obviously work together closely already in the G20. Can I say we were delighted to be invited to the G7 last year in Biarritz. That was really important opportunity, particularly for us to bring an Indo-Pacific dimension to the discussions. I mentioned a little bit earlier, we work with France on the Alliance for Multilateralism that France and Germany launched at the UN. So there's a lot we can do together multilaterally and regionally to make sure that we can indeed support rules-based international systems.
Ambassador, if I can finish off with one question, which would be about the challenges of doing business, given where France is at, just having gone back into confinement. At the other end in Melbourne, we are just coming out, and it's been extraordinary to me to deal with my friends in different states and to realise no one quite understood how different your life is when you can only go in 5 kilometre circles around your house. And I'm mindful it's now a 1 kilometre circle around your house, beautiful house that it is. But you can also work, which is a good thing. But one thing you find, of course, when government does impose restrictions of that order, that is the issue of the day, how people are living and working and getting their lives done. The nice to have parts of government are pushed to the side for the must have business that must get done that day. How do bilateral relationships thrive and grow in circumstances where government's minds are reasonably elsewhere? How does business get done in such circumstances?
Thanks, Zoe. And by the way, congratulations on where you're at in Victoria and Australia more generally. It's fantastic to see. I'm very proud as Australia's ambassador to France to see what a great job we're doing, and it's a part of showing what Australia is as a country. Obviously, France, like the rest of Europe, is confronting a very difficult second wave. But I must say, and I've only been here, it's my first week in the role, but I've been really impressed by how you can continue working. It's actually new methods of working, the online, the virtual. So in response to your question, obviously COVID is a big focus, and France is putting a lot of effort into doing what's needed to make sure the situation is brought under control. But it doesn't mean everything else has stopped. I mean, in fact, far from it. Work is continuing across the board. The embassy's working, we're working remotely, but we are still open for business. And the French government is still open for business. And I've had discussions, even in my first few days, on a range of different issues with various French interlocutors. So I'm not underestimating the difficulty of Europe overcoming and getting through this phase, but it's not the only thing that we're focused on. It's not the only thing the French government is focused on. Business continues, and that's really important. And the economic, nothing more so than the economic side, looking at the relaunching, the recovery packages. So yeah, there's a lot we can still do, and we're using new means of doing it. So I've known nothing else in France but this way of doing it. So, you know, who knows? I might prefer to do it this way. No, I don't think so. I'm really looking forward to going a little bit beyond the 1 kilometre radius at some stage. But no, the work continues. We're engaged, we're active, as is the French government. So, yeah, that's where we're at. But thank you. And
well, hopefully, because Jerome would kill me if I didn't ask, because of the ease with which we can do this now, maybe we can pull you into more FATCHE events going forward. What seemed impossible to us 6 months ago is now the easiest thing in the world, to have incredible engagement via technology in real time. It's been extraordinary.
I absolutely agree. And to be honest, you know, it's the same thing. Travel, you know, I want to get back to travel. I want Australians to come to France. I want French business people to get to Australia. I want ministers to travel, but it is amazing. It's a long way to go. So even when travel's, you know, it's not that easy to just do it. Whereas you pick up the phone, you can talk. And that habit of doing that has started. And I think that will continue, even when we can hop back on planes again.
Yeah,
I would look forward to it, is what I'm saying.
As we to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. What an extraordinary start to FATCHE's Business Forum for 2020. And as I said, we'll dial you in for another one sometime soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Zoe, and thank you, Jason. Thank all of you, and thanks to all of the conference participants. I'm sure you'll have a wonderful event, and look forward to seeing you all virtually or in person at some stage.
Thanks very much.